You join me? No, you have to stay in the chair. There, you can see. Now you can see everybody. Say hello. Say hi. Hi.
All right, now it's behave yourself time, right? Okay.
Yeah, well,
But don't we always behave ourselves? Okay. Book. Oh, if I disappear at some point, it's because my landscape guy showed up and I have to go out and talk to him. So
hi.
I don't know when he said today. He didn't say when. I'm lucky they come at all.
Yeah.
And then somebody showed up last night at the door and said, "Oh, I did the people on this side and on that side. Do you need the bushes trimmed?" And truthfully said to him, he's coming tomorrow. So it was that drought this summer and the heat. I have some I haven't had it done since then, and there's bushes and plants that have to get attention.
Understand.
Hi, Pam.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Pam.
I missed you, but Florida was nice.
I bet it was.
I don't know how this got on my desk. It isn't even mine. Hey Pam, how you doing?
Good, good. Trying to do catch up, laundry, getting the rest of my life organized back.
Mhm.
Oh, you just got back?
Yeah, just got back from a week in Florida at my sister's. We had a sister's get together.
Saw the picture on Facebook with the
Yeah.
all of you together. That was pretty
Yeah,
cool.
That's nice that you do that.
yeah, it was fun. My mother would have been very happy that we
Um,
take on this thing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
so where in Florida?
Hmm.
Where in Florida?
I'm trying to think of the official name. It's down near Fort Lauderdale.
Boca Raton?
Hmm?
Close to Boca Raton?
Basically that area, I believe. I
Okay.
can't think of the name of the thing, but yeah, very nice.
Got a cousin that lives in West Palm Beach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my they have a boat, so we did some.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Does one of them live down there or do you visit?
yeah. One of them lives down there in the winter,
Oh, that's nice. Okay.
and we rented bikes and did bike riding
That's
around
fun.
Sanibel Island, and
Nice.
so it was fun.
Good.
Did you
Sounds
collect
like it.
seashells?
Yeah,
Sounds like it.
yeah.
Did you collect seashells?
At the seashore?
Well, Sanibel is supposed to be known for their seashells.
No, I didn't do that. Hi, Bernie.
Hello.
Hi, Bertie. Shall we get started
Okay.
with the blessing together? Baruch.
Atah Adonai,
Hello.
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav,
It's
so
Great Torah.
blessed
Blessed
are you, Adonai our God,
God,
ruler of
ruler of
the
the world,
was
who
sanctified
sanctified us with your commandments,
commandments,
us.
commanded us to engage in
engage in the
the
words of Torah.
Okay, Rabbi, let's hear about Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Who's been to Mount Sinai?
I think I've been near it.
I don't think I've been there.
I did a
Nope.
tour. When we did a tour, I'm not sure.
When I was
Wasn't on our
16,
tours.
I did a 6-week tour of Israel, and they took us to what was reputedly Mount Sinai in the Sinai Desert, which was then under Israeli control. And we were woken up at like 3 a.m, and we climbed up Mount Sinai.
I think that's where I
And
was.
Are you implying that it's no no longer under Israeli control?
Correct. The entire Sinai Peninsula was given to the Egyptians in the Peace
Oh,
Treaty
shoot.
of 1979.
Hmm.
So anyway, I was there. Um, Moses had left some gum wrappers, so I found those.
He wouldn't have done that. It's not
No.
ecologically
Yeah.
appropriate.
Marsha's right. He did have his,
Ah, um, and well, then I guess it wasn't Moses, but he
Okay.
was the only one up there before me, so I don't know. And this is considered maybe the most important thing in Jewish history from a theological point of view, from a religious thinking point of view. And so the question that Harvey Fields asked this morning is what happened at Mount Sinai? And so everyone will talk about the Torah was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. But what does that mean? And what was given? Was it the whole Torah, the whole 5 books? Or was it just the 10 Commandments? Or was it something else? And the answer, of course, we don't know, but the goal this morning is to look at some of these questions. So that's my introduction. So if there's any opening, brief and pointed opening comments that you have, this is your time to speak. Pam, Marcia,
I'm afraid.
you're afraid?
I'm afraid to comment. A
Oh,
couple of weeks ago, didn't we, I missed some part of one of the classes or something. And there was a lot of discussion about, was there ever anything that happened at Mount Sinai? Was this part
oh.
that,
Yeah,
so,
we waited until you weren't there so I could
Uh-huh.
talk about critical theories that you might find, religiously offensive.
well, it's just that, I mean, this is such a major part of the history of the Jewish people. It's hard to say this couldn't have happened. It's so hard to say that, And don't you think?
Well, this is Cy Perlis is not with us this morning, but he would say, what actually happened there. And he would
No,
point out, certain reasons why it could not have happened the way that the Torah describes it.
we have Bernie.
We do have Bernie.
So,
Bernie tries to play both sides of the fence. He doesn't
Blame,
want to.
blame it on me.
okay, you can take it. Yeah.
Well, you were a
Right.
witness there, Bernie.
Oh, and
That
so,
was a joke. I'm sorry. That was rude.
wow.
See, if there wasn't for Mount Sinai, we wouldn't have bagels and cream cheese, Bernie.
Why?
He's eating it right now. Well, the
No,
Jewish
but-
people would not have been
Ah,
together, or et cetera, and
yes, they would be still putting butter on white bread, right?
right,
Or mayonnaise on white bread,
right. Or
right?
mayonnaise on corned beef, that's even worse. So.
Ooh.
Oh my. Pam,
I have a question. When we did our tour of Israel, I can't remember whether we went in the vicinity of Mount Sinai.
no, you wouldn't have because it's in the
No.
Sinai Desert.
Hmm?
It's not in Israel.
Where is it?
it's in
Sinai.
the Sinai
Desert.
Peninsula. So
Oh,
we
okay.
were near it.
Okay.
So you'd have to keep going past the Negev, and it's after 1979, it became Egyptian territory.
Oh, it's Egyptian territory. Okay, thank you.
So, but it was deliberately, even then, it was considered outside of Israel. I mean, that was the whole point. God wanted to give the Torah outside of Israel.
Really?
Right. I mean, that wasn't the whole point, but that was one of the points that this is a universal set of things, whatever you call them, covenants, laws, obligations, commitments, suggestions. And it was not dependent upon being in the land of Israel.
I always thought it was part of, it was in Israel, so this is an interesting factoid to have.
Okay.
Hmm.
Evelyn, Bernie, Donna.
I don't know. It seems to me that this is so, it's speculation, and everyone has to put their 2 cents in and make a comment on it. Other than what is written and handed down to us, it's how we interpret what is down there. And of course, there's no way of ever really figuring out. I don't think there's enough information that's been handed down where we can be a detective and try and put the picture together. It's there, and we can take it as one interprets it. And depending upon the rabbis or the particular groups that have evolved over the centuries, the millennia, you have all of these different interpretations, and one could be as right or as wrong as the other. And so we as a group today choose to take whatever interpretation suits our particular current philosophy. And I don't know, somehow it doesn't make sense to me to constantly speculate on what went on there. What we know is what has been written, and beyond that, it's our interpretation. And so whatever we make of it today is what is relevant to us, per se.
Mhm.
Richard has given us the cosmos now.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Richard. So, I mean, Evelyn's point is understood. We're here to try to understand what it might mean to us, not what exactly happened historically, which cannot be established, or certainly not by us.
Yeah.
That's archaeologists try to dig to try to find evidence literally in the sand. But we're not going off to the Sinai Desert to dig in the sand. And even if we did, the odds of finding anything that would be very helpful is very small. Yes, Marcia.
So it's interesting that whoever wrote the Torah, whatever truth there is to it, they've tried to bring 10 rules to get human behavior, well, not human, civilized behavior, I guess it is, down to some sort of a kernel of basic rules to follow through life. And this is what they've come up with, is the 10 Commandments. And it's interesting that it's an interesting concept that they actually had the ability to work this out, to say this is how we're going to proceed, and keep it very basic so that people could follow it. And I think that's really important, you know?
Well-
But even at the time of the rabbis, they really didn't know what had happened. So they had to come up with their own theology, and theology is not intended to be historical.
Right.
It's supposed to be, what we see in religious terms, which is different than what we see in historical terms. Yes, Evelyn.
No, I was just going to say human behavior being what it has always been, because they have proof of humans fighting with each other and cooperating with each other. And therefore, these rules made sense because the 10 Commandments made sense because it was put in very simplistic terms so
Yeah.
that humans could interact with each other, cooperate, and form a cohesive group which benefited the greater group, as it were, the greater society. And where the people did not behave in an appropriate fashion, you had mayhem and warfare and chaos and people being destroyed and crops and wealth being destroyed. So it became a means for people to advance themselves in a sense and become cooperative, become more productive, and be better as human beings.
Right. Great.
Okay, that's true. And if you want to look in chapters 19 and 20 in the book of Exodus, you can see the story that we're talking about. And I'll just read a little bit of it. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, meaning that it's in the third month. So they'd left Egypt 2 or 3 months earlier, maybe 2.5 months earlier. On that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God. The Lord called him from the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the children, house of Jacob, and declare to the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine. But you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. So this is a very important point. So God has brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and they've wandered around, or they've traveled for a couple of months only. We know that the time in the Sinai desert is going to be 40 years in the end. So, but that hasn't happened yet. And now God wants to formalize the relationship. And God is going to formalize it by giving the Torah, whatever that means. Okay. Let's turn to Harvey Fields. Do I have a volunteer to start reading?
I'll start.
Okay, Evelyn, we're on page 47 on the left-hand column towards the top parak bet. What happened out Mount Sinai?
The giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai is one of the most important events in Jewish history. It is also a moment filled with mystery. The Torah reports that while the people of Israel stood at the bottom of the mountain, they not only saw flames and smoke rising from it, but also heard the blare of horns and felt the whole mountain tremble violently. According to the report, the people were so frightened that they remained below while Aaron and Moses climbed to the top. Afterwards, Moses descended and presented the Ten Commandments to the Israelites. From that moment until today, Jews have asked the question, what happened at Mount Sinai? Is the Torah report an accurate recording of history or a legend in which some kernels of truth are hidden?
Okay.
Or a
And
little
I
of
would
both.
change Harvey Field's question because obviously it's not an accurate recording of history. So I don't really like the first part of the question. The second part of the question, that it's a legend which some kernels of truth are hidden. He has to define truth. Are we talking about religious truth? Or are we talking about historical truth? If we're talking about historical truth, I'm just not that interested. You know, how much of this is historically true? Well, that's a completely different thing. What we're interested in is what does Judaism as a midrashic system, what does it say about Mount Sinai, and why is that interesting to us, and why is that meaningful? So my questions are a little different than Harvey's. Yes.
What was that adjective you just used?
Which adjective?
Mishnah?
Mishrashik?
Oh, midrashic. Midrashic is midrash, meaning stories.
Oh,
So we tell stories about these things, but the reason it's not just stories, it's midrash, is that midrash is rabbinic stories that have meaning. So if I tell you a long story about how my gardener cut too much off of one cactus or something, and you shouldn't use him because he's expensive, that's just a story about a gardener. But midrash is stories that form part of our religious tradition and have some sort of religious and meaning that we pass on from generation to generation. So a midrash is very different than a story. It's more meaningful, but it doesn't necessarily make it more truthful. My story about my gardener may be 100% true. It may have happened a week ago, but it's not really of any broader importance. So therefore, it's less important. So it's not what's true that matters, it's what's religiously meaningful that matters, at least to me. So, midrashic.
Thank you. I'll impress people
Marcia,
now.
what?
I said I'll impress people now that I have this new word.
Yeah.
Richard, I
Well,
wasn't sure if you're just pointing
from
to
a
the sky.
non-theological standpoint, if we look at this as stories that have some relevance, the Jewish, our Jewish ancestors are sitting at the base of an active volcano. And luckily, they all weren't killed by the volcano. That's what it sounds like to me. But of course, as you say, this is a religious book. So we're looking at God made all this noise and all this furor and all this tremoring, and all the horns blowing, and it wasn't related to a earthquake, to a volcanic eruption.
Wow.
That sound.
You made
Right,
it.
Donna?
I'm sorry, here I am. Well, the things that I know about the computer could be in a thimble, and I'm always running into a problem. I'm sorry.
Hey, you did it at least.
Yes, you did.
You're here.
By accident. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
And we're hoping that Bernie will not give us a computer virus. Looks like Bernie has a cold, am I right? No, because you're blowing your nose. Nope, okay.
I'm allergic to my building, I think.
Oh,
Oh, you're building. Interesting.
We're gonna do an intervention and go to Denver and bring Bernie back to Phoenix.
Sounds like it could be a lawsuit.
I fixed it. I'll explain later. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How-
don't tell anybody about our kidnapping plans.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, how many stories through the ages of other cultures as well have there been physical phenomenon such as earthquakes, volcanoes erupting, asteroids dropping, that the uninformed people have attributed to gods or entities that they had no control over and did not understand, and how much of that has been incorporated into our culture as well as other various cultures, attributing it to a god as opposed to physical phenomenon that happened and happened frequently, more frequently in the past than perhaps now. And
Well, the classic example of that, Evelyn, is Noah's Ark. So it seems possible that there was some sort of a flood in the ancient Near East, because every culture in the ancient Near East has a flood story.
yeah.
Maybe there was a big flood in the whole area, or maybe just every time it rains, it's maybe like a natural psychological thing to worry that the rain isn't going to stop and you're going to all get flooded. So either way, every culture, the Akkadians and the Ugaritic and every language and every culture, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, everybody had a myth about, a flood that was created by the gods. And yes, they attributed it to the gods, whereas we would attribute it to, El Nino or global warming or whatever it is. So, or just too much precipitation or a storm front or whatever the meteorological explanation might be. But I think now in a modern context, we're reinterpreting it so that we don't actually think that, God, was the responsible for natural phenomena, but nevertheless, there's meaning that can be derived from the whole story of Noah's Ark. And similarly here, whatever happened physically, it's not really that concerning to me. Maybe there was an earthquake, maybe there was a volcano, maybe there was whatever. There may have been some fighter jets going by at that time and they made a lot of noise.
UFOs.
Yeah.
Well,
That
well,
too.
don't laugh. When the UFOs land in Phoenix, I'm going to say, I told you not to laugh. And
They haven't already landed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
it's
not.
called Air Force Base here in Phoenix, I mean, in Peoria.
And apparently these UFOs are piloted by extraterrestrials who are not little and they're not green and they don't have antennas on their heads.
And they're smart.
And they're smart, but they're not green. So the stereotype is wrong. Donna.
Yeah, you said just a second ago, and maybe I missed a lot. I know I missed a lot. But you said that God couldn't be responsible for a natural phenomena. Why not?
Well, I wasn't trying to say God couldn't be responsible for natural phenomena. I was just saying that if it was just a natural phenomenon, I mean, sometimes, it rains. So
Okay.
that's part of the natural world.
Right?
So presumably God set up a system and then the system just works.
Well, but I'm not sure about that. Maybe God behind it does these things. I mean, if you're
Right.
saying that this just happened out of the blue, maybe it didn't. Maybe God is behind everything.
Right. So you could argue that every time it rains, God decides to have it rain, or you
Right.
could say that God set up a system of natural phenomena, whereas the natural system just works on its own. There's all sorts of this is part of theology. What do you believe about the natural world? Or you can believe that God is a immovable mover and the world is where the world is, and God doesn't necessarily run the world in the way that Donna is suggesting that God does. So there's at least several different ways of looking at it, ranging from God being very active to God not being active at all. So you could take any of these views, but how does that reflect on Mount Sinai and the topic of the week? And so it could mean anything, but I'm not so much interested in what you think God did or didn't do. I'm more interested in why that might be meaningful. What is our, so in the little box on the bottom of 47, the second one says the Torah was not given to angels. And so what the rabbis are saying there is that the whole purpose of Torah is to give it to us. And so we're now responsible for the Torah, not God, not the angels.
So we're responsible for behaving according to the rules of Torah. Is that
Oh,
what
well,
you're saying?
that's maybe what they meant. The way I interpret it today is we're responsible for reinterpreting it to integrate scientific views into the religious views, and that only we are capable of doing that. We're not going to get additional information from God necessarily. I'm
What
starting
about-
a course on prophets in a week, next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, that you might want to take. And the prophecy has ended in Judaism. There is no more prophets. Pam and then Evelyn.
Well, I also take it that we're responsible for spreading the Torah out to the entire Jewish community
And beyond, right?
and beyond. Yes.
And beyond.
We have to tell the story of the Torah to get other people to read the Torah.
Right.
But
Right. So even though God doesn't make any royalties, nothing.
but Jewish people are not apostolizing, is that the word?
proselyte?
Oh, no, that
Yeah.
was not true. That's not true at all.
That isn't true?
We became non-proselytizing because the Christians passed laws saying that if we proselytized, the penalty was death.
Oh,
So then we became very
I'll stop you.
non-proselytizing.
Yeah, as the Hebrews advanced into Israel itself, they were trying to convert those particular tribes to Judaism as they conquered them. And so at that point, in historically, yes, they were proselytizing.
And we even proselytized by force, where we conquered certain tribes and said, you have to convert or we will kill you, which is generally not nice to do.
But it's common.
Yes, Minya.
Would you consider Chabad a group that proselytizes?
Not really, no. They're careful not to really openly proselytize.
But they do things like bring you candles if you're in the hospital for Friday night. They brought me last year shmira matzahs in this giant box.
Wow.
I even had asked them, how do you know I'm even Jewish?
Hmm.
And they said that they had a list that they followed.
Me too,
Yeah.
I had the exact same thing happen.
Yeah, so they're
Yeah.
getting named somewhere. So that's an
Whatever happened-
indirect way of doing it and not.
What happened to
But
the privacy law?
but they're approaching people they see as Jewish. That's not proselytizing. Proselytizing is converting people from other religions or from no religion.
Okay, but on the other hand, if someone's in a hospital bed and there's someone who's not Jewish next to them, and they come in with a menorah and two candles or two candle holders, wouldn't the person in the other bed say, wow, that's really impressive?
Yeah, well, that's
like that.
accidental, but they don't go deliberately out to try to convert people to Judaism. And in fact, they don't really convert barely at all, if at all.
So the people that they do, I won't use the word recruit, but they do get people to come to services at a Chabad service.
So
because
there's
of the
another
life-
word. They're trying to bring back wayward Jews to back into the fold, but that's
Right.
that's in Hebrew that would be likarev or kiruv work, which is bringing people who are already Jewish closer to the traditions.
Okay.
But they're not trying to convert.
Other
They
people.
don't stand outside of churches on Sunday when people come out of church and say you're in the wrong religion, you should join our religion. That
No,
would be but that would be proselytizing.
okay. Thanks for the
And
difference.
other people do that, and there's nothing wrong with doing that as long as it's done respectfully. I mean, it wouldn't be respectful to stand outside a church, but there's people that go door to door and say, do you have a religion? We have a religion we're interested in telling you about. Would you be interested in inviting us in for coffee and we can tell you about our religion? You might like it.
Yes.
And, that,
Mormons do.
yeah. And,
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses, there are plenty of them out there that ring doorbell to doorbell and invite themselves. Yeah. Okay. Shall we,
Um,
you want to continue, Rabbi?
yes, thank you, Evelyn.
How the Torah was given. The Torah was given portion by portion. In other words, not all at once, obviously, but piece by piece. Does that mean the 10 Commandments and then the rest of the story was made up later? Is that what they're intimating here?
Well, the parsha, there's 54 parshas that the rabbis determined. So this is saying that that God gave the Torah according to those 54 portions, which is not true.
Yeah. Okay.
Theologically, yes. Practically, no.
Say again, Richard?
Theologically, yes, because the rabbis say this was done. As you said, we have two aspects. We have the historical and the theological.
Yeah, but even theologically, I don't agree with that, even theologically, but okay, I disagree with the sages of the Talmud on many, many, many things. Okay, Evelyn, keep going.
Okay, the Torah was not given to angels. You discussed.
Okay, and that says it's given to normal people. So if we were perfect, if we were wonderful, if we spent all our time praising God, then it would be a different Torah. So this is a Torah given for the average working person. We assume that you curse and you shout and you spit, and you're just like a normal person.
Spitting is not normal. Okay, when the Torah was given, God showed Moses all the details of Torah and all the innovations that would later be introduced by the rabbis.
Aha, you see, the
The
rabbis
and the
want all
Megillah?
the changes they made to be retroactively accepted by God. Yes, I reject that theologically. Pam,
Unmute.
What do they mean
shout
by
louder.
innovations?
Okay,
Well, for example, the classic example is where it says in the Torah, "You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." The rabbis of the Talmud, many hundreds of years later, said that refers to don't eat milk with meat. So that's the rabbinic extrapolation on what's written in Torah. But that's clearly not what the Torah meant, according to my feeling. And the idea that God, was planning on all these innovations is ridiculous. So I reject that historically and theologically. Richard.
It seems to me if this third sense, when the Torah was given, God showed Moses all the details of the Torah and all what all the rabbis would do in the future. This sounds like predeterminism, like Calvinism, that everything
Right.
and we do
Right.
not have free will. That God is determining
Well,
everything we do. It's not free will.
but it's much more limited. They're only saying that in terms of they're saying that the rabbis are the vehicle of God for this one thing, for the development of Judaism. So, for example, when the Torah says, in Passover, you should roast an animal and then do a ritual in the desert, the rabbis later made up the whole Seder and the Seder plate, that this sort of thing was expected by God. But it doesn't say in other ways that what you do tomorrow is preordained. So it's not totally Calvinistic. It's just on this one thing that the traditions that were later to be added by the rabbis were already anticipated by God, and that the rabbis are the vehicle of God's will for that one thing.
I have a question about the source. It says the Megillah. Is that supposed to be the book of Esther?
No, Megillah is a part of the Talmud called Megillah, Masechet Megillah, in which the laws of reading the Megillah are discussed.
Oh.
So the subject of this part of the Talmud is, when do you read the Megillah of Esther? Because it's an obligation to hear it read during the daytime in Hebrew. So let's say we all go to temple the previous night or the previous Friday night, and we have and I read a few lines here and a few lines there in Hebrew, and I explain a little bit of it, and then the kids do a play, and I give a short sermon on it. That does not meet the obligation to hear it read. Plus, it's not at the right time. It has to be the following day. So I remember when I was in college, my roommate, who I wanted to speak to us, but he's not available at this time, but he's still pretty orthodox. He's still quite orthodox. And he's orthodox. So he went out to a Purim party and he got a little drunk. And in the morning, he was like hungover and sick. So somebody came to our dorm room and sat there and read the whole Megillah in Hebrew in front of him so that he would be able to do the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah. I don't know how much he absorbed because he was still very sick, but and that's why when they have last year I went to two Orthodox Megillah readings, one at the Valley Beit Midrash and one at Chabad of Glendale, and in both cases they had a yeshiva student read the entire Megillah, word for word in Hebrew, very quickly, which is just a complete waste of time. But it's required according to this part of the Talmud.
Okay, onward. Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai and handed it on to Joshua. Joshua handed it to the elders, and the elders handed it to the prophets. The prophets handed it on to the people of the great assembly.
This is the beginning of Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the sages. It's the most famous part of the Talmud, and it's frequently studied in study groups. We could study it. I don't know, did we do that here in adult ed in the last couple years? I think we might have, but if not, I did it in Alabama and in Jamaica, and so it's a very popular tractate, and this is the opening section. So the rabbis are trying to say the Torah was transmitted from generation to generation exactly the way it is. So what we're teaching you is exactly what the original religion was. But this is wrong. So I'm rejecting a lot of rabbinic theology this morning.
Yeah.
Richard, you'll tell the UFOs to be kind.
It's God behind me.
Okay.
See that?
Well, I hope
You're centered with all these swirling things.
Yeah.
I hope God agrees with me and not with the rabbis.
Well, you haven't been struck down, so you're safe.
I call it the classical rabbinic tradition, and the views that they have are explained here. And I don't agree with almost anything that they say, but okay. Okay, Evelyn, you want to start at the top of page 47 on the right-hand side?
There are many differing views about what happened at Mount Sinai. For instance, Rabbi Yochanan claims that God's voice was divided into 7 voices, and the 7 voices were further divided into the 70 languages spoken by all the peoples of the world at that time. Other rabbis of Yochanan's time disagree. They claim that God spoke with a single voice.
Okay, explain. Okay, Donna, or whoever would like to, Steve. Does that appeal to you, this idea that when God gave the Torah, that God spoke simultaneously in 70 different languages?
I think that could happen. I don't doubt anything that God can do.
And does that appeal to you? Does that seem to universalize the giving of the Torah in a meaningful way?
Did that appeal to me? I had not thought about it. I don't know.
Okay, Steve?
No comment at this point.
Okay, Bernie?
I just want to know where these guys come up with this stuff.
Well, I think in this particular case, if God just spoke Hebrew, it makes God look rather provincial, right? So God is speaking in a language that's understood by one tribe in the Middle East. If you want the Torah to be seen as a universal document, then it would be a lot better to have God simultaneously speaking in every known language at the time. That makes it something that is intended. It sends the message that this is a meaningful message, or this is meaningful messages for everyone everywhere. And of course, this is before the rabbis said this, long before there was any awareness that you could have Google Translate actually do that. Yes, Bernie.
This brings up another question. When did the concept of the chosen people arise?
Well, I guess it kind of comes out of this.
Mhm.
Well,
God's giving the Torah, and in fact, here you go. This is back and forth. If God deliberately speaks in all different languages of the world, then God is addressing the Torah to everyone. if God is only speaking in Hebrew just for the Jews, in those days the Jews understood Hebrew, then it's just for us, and then we're the chosen people, and God is giving something special to us that God's not giving to anyone else. So if you accept what Rabbi Yochanan says, it makes the Torah more universal. If you say at the bottom where the other rabbis who said that God spoke with a single voice, then it maybe makes it more of a God speaking to the chosen people. Donna.
Yeah, but you could turn that around and you say God spoke in all these languages at once, or God spoke in Hebrew and everybody understood it in their own language.
Okay.
That's what I would think too. Yeah.
Yes. So, and again, we're not interested in what actually happened. We're interested in these ideas in terms of what they might indicate. So, but if God spoke in Hebrew or God spoke in whatever God language has, and everybody understood in their own language, then again, that makes the Torah intended for a universal audience, everybody. So if you're an Eskimo and you listen to this, you hear God talking to you in Eskimo language. If you're in Russia, you hear it in Russian, unaccented Russian. If you're in China, you hear it in Chinese, Mandarin or Cantonese or whatever, and so forth. You can't have it more universal than that. So is the Torah universal? Is the Torah particular? Are the Jews the chosen people? And what does that mean? There's chosen where God is just like working through us to everybody, or there's chosen where God is really only working with us and not with everybody. So I guess Bernie is asking a very good question, and it depends how you want to frame it. Pam?
I have a question. Are we correct in calling them Jews, or at this point, are they still considered Hebrews who eventually became Jews? We're
Right.
using the term interchangeably, and is that correct?
Oh, I guess I'm using the terms interchangeably, but I guess I am jumping the gun by many hundreds of years. So I guess they would still be the children of Israel, Israelites, maybe they're Hebrews. Yeah, they're not really Jews. I guess what defines Jews is Judaism, and they don't really have Judaism yet, according to my thinking.
So they're not really Israelites either. They are simply Hebrews at this stage of the game.
Okay. But God is trying to emphasize that there's something happening. He's saying, I'm your God. What did he say here? I am the God who brought you out on eagle's wings. And if you're faithful and keep my covenant, and he calls them the house of Jacob and the children of Israel in this excerpt I read from chapter 19. Now, just because chapter 19 refers to them a certain way doesn't mean they really were that way at that time, but it's there.
Jacob lived near Hebron, is that correct? In what we consider Israel today?
It's in what they would call the West Bank today. It's in Judea.
Yeah, that's where he lived. So he was then an Israelite, and he's considered sort of the father of the religion.
Correct. And this Exodus is occurring, hundreds of years after Jacob passed away.
Right.
So in theory, calling the Hebrews the house of Israel would be perfectly reasonable. But whether they saw themselves that way, I don't know. Evelyn's saying they're just Hebrews at this point, and that might be true.
Well, they might be Israelites or Hebrews. They haven't quite received the Torah as yet. Now they're about to receive it. And
Yeah, they're about to receive the Torah, at least according to this account.
right. They're the first of the monotheistic
And
religions.
that's the question we're asking today. What happened in Mount Sinai? And I'm asking that question not in a historical sense. I'm not interested in what actually happened. I'm interested in what are we taught may have happened and why is that significant? That last part's the most important. Marcia.
So they received the Ten Commandments at Sinai, right?
Yes.
So you just said,
Maybe. I mean,
well,
I don't
speculate.
want to
Okay,
I don't want to prejudge anything.
all right. Well, according to what we're reading anyway. So but now you're saying we received the Torah at Sinai?
Well, I don't know.
I'm confused now.
I don't know. Well, I'm confused
The
too.
Torah wasn't even in existence at that point, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to prejudice you. But certainly there's certain Orthodox thinkers that think the entire five books of Moses was given from God to Moses, exactly as
To Moses, okay.
yeah. Well, what happened was God started talking to the whole children of Israel. And after two commandments, the Israelites said, it's too much. We can't bear it. You take the dictation from God, and then you tell us what God said. And this was a mistake because, first of all, Judaism doesn't really like intermediaries between God and the people. I used to hear that one of the differences between Judaism and Catholicism is Catholicism has a priest who's an intermediary between God and the religious, the people of the church, and that Judaism doesn't. But obviously, Judaism kind of does. But I don't think we want to encourage that. So if God comes to TBS, I'll tell God you have to speak on Friday night at 7 p.m. if you want a good crowd. And then I would say, keep it short. The attention span is not long. And then I'd say, use the microphone. And God will say
Hold
what
it
a
up.
lot of people say, I don't need the microphone. I project well. And in the case of people, it's never true. They don't realize how high the ceilings are. And even if they have a big voice, that it just doesn't travel as far as they think. But in God's case, God may actually be able to project very well. So God may not, if God can speak without a microphone, that already is a big advantage.
Well,
And I would say you speak directly to the people. Like, I don't want to be an intermediary here. Because can you imagine? God says, I'll come to your office at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and I'll talk to you all day. And then you tell the people on Friday night what I said. And I can go to another temple and tell them. And I'd say, my God, you can't, my God, literally. I said, I can't do that. You're going to tell me all this stuff, and I can't convey it exactly the way you want me to convey it. I'm gonna interpret it. I'm gonna say he said that, I think, but I don't think he meant that. And then, you're going to watch the video on YouTube later and you're going to say, what did that rabbi in Arizona do? What did he say? He said that he thinks that I said that, but I didn't mean that. So there's going to be an opportunity for just so much distortion, unintentional, where I just don't hear what he's saying right. And then in other cases where I'm going to deliberately interpret it, quote unquote, in a way that God might not like. I mean, it'll be a mess. I don't want to get involved. Let God speak directly to all of you. I mean, do you agree? Yes, Richard.
Well, God doesn't need a microphone because God just gets into our mind. And so we hear God talk to us, right? Theologically.
That's one way of thinking about it, sure. So,
I can speak to multiple people in multiple languages by getting into their mind. Just,
and there is And there is a Kabbalistic interpretation that at the time of the giving of the Torah, there was just complete silence. God didn't actually make any noise. All the birds stopped chirping, and there was just complete silence. And that was the revelation, complete silence. Pam.
Do we know where we got the expression, my God? I mean, we use it all the time. My God, this, my God, that. Do you know, is there a history on this?
You have to Google it, Pam.
Okay.
Yes,
But
that's
wouldn't that be
beyond.
considered, wouldn't that be considered blasphemous in a way? For
Yeah.
some-
I
Well,
will,
there is a sense that certain words relating to God were then used, reused in a negative way. So
Taking the
there's
name of the
certain
Lord in vain.
curses, like there's certain curses that involve, God, where you're actually cursing, but and this was one of the 10, do not take my name in the name of the Lord in vain.
Right.
And I don't, but Pam's asking a very good question. Where did all this develop from, this idea of cursing and using God's name? I mean, there's a story of Bilam, and the donkey, where a non-Jewish prophet is asked to curse the Israelites, but he can't. When he gets up there on the mountain of Haifa, and he's being paid by a non-Jewish king who wants to fight with the Israelites, and Bilam can't, any word out of his mouth is praise and not condemnation. But it's an interesting topic, Pam. I think, you could write a book on it.
Probably been
But
done.
whatever you find out, let us know.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments so far? If not, we'll turn back to Evelyn. We're in the
Okay.
middle-ish of 47 on the right.
Rabbi Isaac taught that the message of all the prophets who were to arise in later generations, people like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Micah, and Hosea, were given to Moses with the Torah. Rabbi Simeon ben Lachish agrees. Extending this idea that all the books of the Hebrew Bible were given to Moses at Mount Sinai, some of the ancient rabbis claim that God gave two Torahs to Moses. One they call Torah Shebechetev, written Torah, comprising the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The other they call Torah Shebe'al Aleph, oral Torah, made up of all the books of the prophets, the Midrash, Agadah, the Talmud, and all decisions and explanations of Jewish law by rabbinic scholars through the ages. Agreeing that these two Torahs were given by God to Moses and the Jewish people, of the sages explain that God said to Moses, "Write down everything I tell you, for I have made a covenant with Israel." God then dictated the Torah, the Talmud, Mishnah, and Gemara, the Midrash, and even answers to all the questions that leading rabbis in the future would require when they were asked, what did God say to Moses on Mount Sinai?
Okay, so this expands on the view that we already gave. Is everybody familiar with this from before? That the rabbis of Talmud believed that everything that they were teaching, in addition to everything that was in the written Torah, was part of what was given at Mount Sinai. And they call this the dual Torah. Jacob Neusner calls this the dual Torah, the written Torah and the oral Torah. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this concept from before.
Yeah, vaguely, but I have a question though.
So
They-
only 2 of you out of 8 are familiar with this concept. So
Tablets? Or
what?
So did they did the sages say Moses wrote on clay tablets?
Didn't say that.
Well, he doesn't say that, but if he wrote down everything that later rabbis were going to say, and if you see the tractates of the Talmud, it can fill, I don't have my bookshelves behind me here, but
You're
it
writing
could
on,
fill like, at least one big bookshelf.
you're writing
So
on the
that's
tablets, it's a lot of rock.
information.
Yeah. Well,
But
you know,
it means that when a rabbi 50 years ago ruled that you could put milk and meat in microwaves at different times and it didn't make the microwave treif, if that's a ruling, I'm not exactly sure, then that was already predetermined by God. God told Moses that at Mount Sinai. So because they're afraid of a situation where rabbis like myself are going to just say, this was Judaism that we inherited, and we're going to consciously and deliberately change it to meet the needs of the time, even though Moses and Abraham or whoever, and even God had no pre knowledge of what we're going to do. But that other idea is very much, I think, consistent with Judaism as well, that Torah is in our hands and we're responsible for it. But the rabbis didn't like that idea. They wanted everything to have been given from God to Moses, everything. And that idea is not something I would
well,
endorse.
it's impractical to think that Moses, one, was capable of writing, and two, that he would be able to sit down and magically have all of this verbiage down on clay tablets, because they obviously it wouldn't have been feasible to have it on sheepskin. I mean, the impracticality of it just boggles the mind that they would come up with this concept.
Well, it protected them because it meant everything that they said had the authority.
Ordained.
Religious groups are interested in authority. So if I get up Friday night and I say, I think that we should stop eating meat because it's bad for the environment. And Pam might say, well, the rabbi might be right, but I like to eat meat. I'm not going to stop. And Richard might say, it's not even a good idea. And Bernie is say, I'm going to ignore it. And Donna's going to say, where does he get that from? And so I'm not going to get very far. But if I say this was the original ruling when God gave the Torah to Moses, it included no meat, then everybody would go, oh, okay, well, we better stop because we didn't know. And Pam shaking your head. Why?
We wouldn't stop.
But you're more likely to, if I can convince you that it was an original law from God to Moses, you're much more likely to stop than if it's say, well, this is Dana Kaplan's idea on something that was in the Torah that Moses got from God thousands of years ago, and this is a Kaplan original. They'd say, well, the rabbi's creative and he's interesting, but I'm not going to listen to him.
I just don't think people in general, even back then, would give up meat.
All right, well, take a different example then, but it's more likely you have more authority if you can claim it was an original idea from God rather than it's my creative rendition of what God may have said. Yes, Richard.
Well, this is a mild retort to Evelyn. From a practical standpoint, yes. I mean, back then, we always have the idea of the clay tablets, but they had papyrus. They did have sort of a paper, but it would have been very laborious to do it in a practical sense. But we're talking in the religious sense, as Rabbi would say. It's a religious sense. So he probably wrote at 150,000 words a minute.
Uh-huh.
Inspired, God inspired, yes.
God inspired him to do that. So
You couldn't, it's
ancient rabbi, the Talmud would say, Moses did this at 150,000 words a minute and finished it in a day and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he finished it in 35 seconds.
This is not a theological problem. It is a sociological one, because basically, as Rabbi said, the rabbis were looking for authority. Authority is power. they wanted to have the final say on all aspects of the religion, and therefore they insinuated that these things were so that they would be the final authority. And to me, this is basically what their attempt was. And I don't look at it as a theological question. I look at it more from a human behavioral one.
Mhm.
Back to, as Pam said, if God said, don't eat meat, that there would be a certain amount of people that would still eat meat. Now, God did say, don't eat a certain meat. And there are still many, many Jews and people in the world that still eat that certain meat.
Mm.
Hmm.
True. Okay, Evelyn, back to you.
Okay. Clearly, the ancient rabbi, this is the bottom of page 47, the last paragraph. Clearly, the ancient rabbis have added their own versions of what actually happened between God, Moses, and the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. Their belief that 2 Torahs were given, including answers to all questions that might arise throughout all time, not only adds to the mystery of whatever occurred at Mount Sinai, but also grants special authority to all subsequent interpreters. This is an important point that should not be overlooked. As a result of their theory of 2 Torahs, rabbis now have the right to say that their own interpretation decisions of the law according to Moses at Mount Sinai. The whole Torah from Rambam. I believe with perfect faith that the whole Torah now in our possession is the same that was given to Moses, our teacher.
All right, so I generally love Maimonides, but I think he's wrong there as well. Okay, keep going.
This view of what happened at Sinai became the most dominant interpretation among Jews from early rabbinic times until the beginning of the 19th century. Philosopher Yehuda Halevi, for example, writes that the people believed that Moses held direct communication with God, that his words were not creations of his own mind. They did not believe Moses had seen a vision in sleep, or that someone had spoken with him between sleeping and waking, so that he only heard the words in his imagination, but not with his ears, that he saw a phantom and afterwards pretended that God had spoken with him. Halevi concludes by citing proof of God speaking to Moses at Mount Sinai. He says there was no trickery there, for God's speaking was followed by God's writing. For God wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of precious stone and handed them to Moses. Orthodox Jews continue to claim that God gave the Torah, both the written law and the oral law, to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was a one-time gift or revelation. A complete Torah with everything that Jews would ever need to know was presented to Moses and passed on afterwards from generation to generation as Torah Sinai, to Torah from Sinai. As proof for this claim, today's Orthodox authorities, like Halevi in his time, cite the Torah itself, the Torah text itself. It says, they argue, that God spoke all these words. Therefore, they conclude that it is obviously what happened. A few Orthodox thinkers, however, disagree. Like David Hartman of Jerusalem, they do not believe that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, that was a complete finished system. Hartman explains that belief in the giving of the Torah at Sinai does not necessarily imply that the full truth has already been given, and that our task is only to unfold what was already present in the fullness of the founding moment of revelation. What happened at Mount Sinai, he says, gave the community a direction, an arrow pointing toward a future filled with many surprises. The Sinai moment of revelation invites one and all to acquire the competence to explore the terrain and extend the road. It does not require passive obedience and submission to the wisdom of the past.
All right, now here we have a quote in the box from the 1976 Reform San Francisco statement.
Torah for Reform Jews. Torah results from the relationship between God and the Jewish people. The records of our earliest confrontations are uniquely important to us. Lawgivers and prophets, historians and poets gave us a heritage whose study is a religious imperative and whose practice is our chief means to holiness. Rabbis and teachers, philosophers and mystics, gifted Jews in every age amplified the Torah tradition. For millennia, the creation of Torah has not ceased, and Jewish creativity in our time is adding to the change of tradition.
All right, does that sound different than the earlier stuff, Pam?
Yes. And I also have a question about what they meant by the Jewish creativity. It sounds like we made up stuff.
Yeah.
Well, do we make up stuff or do we read the Torah because it's already written?
Well, I guess to be blunt, we make up stuff. Is that bad?
I have mixed feelings about that.
Well, that's, I guess, that's why the Orthodox didn't want to allow for this. But I don't really see the problem making up stuff. But maybe I maybe I shouldn't confess to that.
What-
So I could say we don't make stuff up, we're just reinterpreting it, Pam.
I like that better.
Sounds better.
Bernie.
And I was just gonna say the same thing, that I look at that as reinterpreting to match modern times rather than don't boil a kid in his mother's milk. For
But
example.
what's wrong with making stuff up?
Nothing. If it works for you.
And if it works for the whole congregation, if I make something up and everybody looks at me like it's interesting, but he's crazy, then that's Rabbi Kaplan made some stuff up. But if everyone accepts it and it becomes practiced, then it's still creative stuff that's been made up, but it's accepted by the whole community and it becomes part of our tradition. So I guess it's tradition and tradition evolves and people make stuff up. And okay, Marcia, Evelyn, and Pam, and Richard.
Okay, so several years ago, when we were having a Friday night service, somebody put the Torah back in, askew into the Torah holder in the ark, and the Torah fell out onto the floor. You were there, anybody? Steve was there, and everybody went, "Oh." Okay. And so Rabbi Moss said, well, there is this tradition where you have to say certain prayers to amend for this. And we were assigned, like bunches of us, certain nights, which to say the prayers to kind of restore the purity of the Torah or whatever. Now, Shelley Moss made up TBS rules about this because we couldn't do it in the Orthodox manner. It just wasn't going to work for our congregation. So he created or made up some sort of a version of that progress or not progress, that purifying of the repurifying of the Torah, or whatever the thing was. Steve, what would you call it that we did?
Well, we also fasted, each one of us who volunteered fasted for one day.
Right.
As a sacrifice for the following of the Torah.
But it wasn't, he created this little version of it. So that
Well, I
was,
don't know whether he created it or he got it from somewhere else, but
he got the basic idea from what was written down about what
yes,
happens if.
yes.
But then he reinterpreted it so the congregation could take part in this
Correct.
ritual. And
I
so
like that because it got everybody thinking.
Yeah,
I remember that.
so it came back to you now. Okay.
Um,
But that was not,
interesting.
an example of the creativity.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I'm thinking of
Evelyn,
I'm thinking of cultural changes and changes in a particular culture as opposed to another culture, specifically the rules of kashrut. And I am sure most Reform Jews have no qualms about eating shrimp or eating pork. You won't find that to be true among the conservative or the Orthodox. And so in this particular culture where this food is available, it is rampant and desirable by those who want to eat it. They don't consider themselves as being wrong in eating these particular foods. And so here in our culture, many in our congregation itself will partake of what would have been normally considered unclean, unkosher foods. And in our culture, in the Reform, it's accepted, not in shul particularly, and yet in the average household, if somebody were to serve shrimp, I don't think anybody would go, "Oh, lordy, lordy, that's wrong." It's. I'm just saying that in our culture today, there are things that were previously considered a no-no, forbidden, mustn't do, and yet it is, if not accepted, tacitly approved at any rate. And so you're getting changes within the religion in one way or another, whether you like it or not, germane to a particular group. Maybe not somewhere else, but in this particular area where we live, yes. So
so I'll give you an example about that. So kashrut, according to the Orthodox rules of eating kosher, you should not eat pork, correct? And you should not eat a lot of other things, and you have to not eat milk with meat and so forth. And as Evelyn pointed out, most Reform Jews don't particularly find that important. So my idea was to, not accept the kosher laws, so that is out the window. But then to reintroduce a new prohibition against just pork based upon the Greek persecution of the Jews in the Maccabean revolt, and that pork represents idolatry, and therefore we should abstain from pork based upon our war against the Greek Syrians in the 2nd century BCE. So I presented this idea in, previous congregations such as Alabama, and there was no discernible change in anyone's behavior. So it was a complete failure. So I didn't want to fight with anyone, but I said, this is a good idea. And they said, what is a good idea? It just didn't register. So it's very hard to introduce new ideas that will stick. So when Pam earlier questioned, did we make stuff up? I'd say, yeah, we make stuff up. The problem with making stuff up is not that we made it up, but that it's getting people to take it seriously. Okay, Pam and then Richard.
I'll pass.
Okay, Richard.
Getting back to the Torah and its originality and the interpretations, I always like to think of the 10 Commandments as our original constitution, and the Torah, that's a Torah, and the Talmud as interpretations of the constitution of the Torah, if I'm correct. And if you're one of the conservative judges in the Supreme Court, you're saying we have to go back to the original and what they actually meant. He says,
Mhm.
liberals will say, no, we interpret it. So you might say in a way, Reform Judaism is sort of the liberal judges, and the very Orthodox are the very conservative judges of our religion. Just two different ways of looking at the same item or the same book.
Hmm.
How's that?
Interesting, very
A
nice,
mild interpretation.
very nice. So, um, but the difference is that the Supreme Court is one court with both literalists and non-literalists on the same court, whereas Reform and Orthodox have split so that there's no communication between them. So they're two completely separate groups. Okay, Evelyn, you want to keep reading?
Sure. What the Torah reveals, is that where we are?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There is little reason to question that Moses, who led our people in the wilderness and organized them into a nation, also gave them laws. Those laws form the basis of the various decisions and practices by which the Israelites lived after they entered the land of Israel. In the course of time, those decisions and practices were recorded, compiled, and edited, a process by which continued down to the time of Ezra, 420 BCE, some centuries after the sojourn in the wilderness. The Torah reveals the working of God in the life of our people in that it articulates the earliest striving of our people to live up to the highest potentialities of human nature. Hartman's view. What happened at Mount Sinai was unforgettable founding moment in Jewish history, but not the conclusion of God's gift of Torah to the people of Israel, is close to the view held by Rabbi Jacob Day Petruchevsky, a leading Reform Jewish scholar. In explaining what occurred, Rabbi Petruchevsky comments, the thunders and lightnings at Sinai, as they appear in the biblical narrative, are an echo sounding through the ages of what happened there. They testify to the fact of revelation, to the impact it had on people. But it is only the man of the prosaic mind, the man lacking in imagination, who would read this biblical account as if it were a news bulletin reporting in every detail what has actually happened. For Petruchevsky, the giving of Torah at Sinai was a momentous event in the history of the Jewish people, but it is not to be seen as the moment in which the entire Torah was given to Moses. Quite the contrary. The laws and commandments of the Torah, Petruchevsky writes, do not all go back to that moment. At any rate, not in the form in which we read them today. They have evolved in the course of the centuries. Different circumstances called forth different responses. Life in the days of the Hebrew monarchy was different from life in the days of the judges, and the generations engaged in the task of settling in Palestine faced different problems from those that beset the wanderers in the desert. Yet all the different responses to all the different challenges were made from the perspective of the initial commitment at Sinai. The giving of the Torah, therefore, is not confined to the occasion at Sinai. What parts of the Torah really and truly took on their present form already at Sinai, we shall probably never know.
All right, so this is much more my thing.
Yeah.
I guess that's obvious, but the earlier start part of this essay, I was like very alienated because I was like, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with that, and now I'm agreeing much more. Pedakowski is he passed away, but he was a major reform thinker, and I guess that would make sense, that I would tend to agree with him more. Comments? Anyone who hasn't spoken recently? Minya, Steve.
I honestly, right now, I'm trying to comprehend the whole thing.
Okay.
Um,
Anybody? Yes, Pam.
I like this phrase.
Yeah, Petachowski is obviously going with the flow. Whatever the particular culture is at the time, or whatever the demands of the culture are, he get the feeling he says you get an appropriate response to those particular circumstances, and when circumstances change, you reevaluate your reaction to it. Am I-
Okay, keep good.
Is
You can
that what
keep-
is that what he's
Yeah.
implying?
I think exactly.
Pam.
Pam, and then Evelyn can keep going.
Okay.
I like this phrase. The giving of the Torah, therefore, is not confined to the occasion at Sinai. The idea that the giving of the Torah continues.
Right. That's the idea of progressive revelation
Yep.
or continuous revelation. And that's a standard reform thing, that we continue to be in dialogue with God in a sense. And so things are being revealed continually. So, because otherwise you're stuck with one event that happened thousands of years ago that dictates everything forever. And I don't like that idea. I like the idea that we're in constant interaction with God and God's world.
Especially with our children and grandchildren, we help continue.
Right.
Marcia.
Well, yeah, so you said Pam, and what I'm thinking as the rabbi was talking about the difference between that approach and orthodoxy, but where it is as it's written in one way, and it's not being able to create or interpret. Let's put the word interpret in there instead of being creative about it, but that we can adapt it to modernity. There is no way that the people at Sinai could even imagine the technological wonders that we live in, and the problems that that can cause with different religious practices. We're Zooming a class, for goodness sake, we're not sitting there in a room, all together, batting heads and going on. I mean, it's just no way could it be interpreted the same way over the years.
Interesting. Okay. Evelyn, you want to keep reading?
Petachowski's view of an evolving Torah of commandments and their interpretations is shared by Rabbi W. Gunther Plaut, who, in considering what happened at Mount Sinai, asks the question, what precisely was revealed? Plaut argues that the traditional answer that the written and oral laws in their entirety were entrusted to Moses at Sinai is unacceptable to me. Only the written law, then. I rebel equally against this thought. Plaut bases his conviction that the entire Torah tradition evolved over the long course of history on the basis of archaeological and historical research. So what does Plaut believe happened at Mount Sinai? In answering the question, he recalls the explanation of modern philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who believed that the people did not hear words spoken at Mount Sinai at all. What happened there and what left a lasting impression, Rosenzweig speculates, is that the people encountered God. It was at Mount Sinai that the people began the process of searching out what God wanted of them. From that moment on, the Jewish people had been engaged in a covenant, a partnership with God. A Jew, Plaut comments, by the very condition of his Jewishness, pays the continuing price of Sinai. If Jewishness remains his fate, Judaism remains the framework of his native spiritual existence, and God his partner. Each generation should regard itself as standing at Sinai.
Okay, and that's Plaut, who wrote the Reform or edited the Reform Torah that is They're just starting a project now to write a new one for the reform movement, which is going to be very different from Plaut's. But for generation, at least a generation, we had the Plaut Chumash that we used in the reform movement. So he basically says very similar things to Pedakowski, I would think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he quotes Franz Rosenzweig, who said that it wasn't that anything was spoken at Mount Sinai, it was that the people of Israel experienced God. So you can see here there's lots of different views of what happened at Mount Sinai. Nobody knows. And it's not knowing that we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to find a meaningful understanding of revelation, of what happened that can help us to make sense of this whole thing in a way that is religiously meaningful. And it doesn't have to be the same idea for everybody. Okay, final thought, Steve.
Well, I was gonna let everyone finish. If they have any final thoughts, do it now, because you got about 2.5 minutes.
Richard.
Let's put you, Rabbi, on the committee to write the new book.
Ah,
I don't have much influence with the New York crowd there.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Yes, well,
Is,
um,
is the new book going to be following this last philosophy essentially?
I
Or
don't know.
You
I
don't
don't
know?
know. But it's going to have the 5 books of Moses, and then it'll have commentary, and it may have the Haftorahs. I don't know. It's a 1-volume book of the 5 books of Moses for synagogue use, just like the last one. I put a bunch of Hertzes in the corner in the sanctuary that we could use if we wanted to, that you may have heard me refer to. But Hertz is the original Orthodox 1-volume Chumash, which was
Does that also have the Haftorah in it?
It's used by the conservatives as well.
Yeah.
it was, yeah.
Does it have the Haftorah in it also?
Yes, yes.
That we can use that for the course that we're taking? This next course?
Well, the course that I'm doing on the prophets is more on the whole prophets, so that won't be terribly useful. No, I want you to come to that course with a full Tanakh.
Hey, we have to
Like
get back to
this.
Steve.
yeah,
Okay,
it's
back
tough.
to Steve. Thank you. This is an interesting day. Donna, one quick comment.
Yeah, so will this replace the Torah?
Well, the new one they're working on, they're just
Yeah.
starting to work on. It won't be out for a couple of years. It will replace the Plaut Chumash that Reform synagogues have used, and it will replace the Hertz Chumash that we have in the corner. But we're not going to buy it because we don't spend enough time on Friday nights going through the Torah, so we just read a few sentences. So it
Right.
would be a big investment and it wouldn't be necessary. But I'll probably recommend it to each of you to buy on your own if you're interested, depending on how it turns out.
Okay.
Okay, back to you, Steve.
All right, let us conclude then with the the closing blessing, and we go on with our day. Together, Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai,
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam
asher
asher
natan
natan
lanu
lanu Torah
Torah emet b'chaye
v'chaye
olam
olam
atah
atah
b'tokeinu.
b'tokeinu. Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai, noten
Adonai
haTorah.
Torah. Blessed
Blessed is
Adonai,
Adonai our
our
God,
God,
ruler of the
of the
universe,
universe,
who
who
has
has
given
given
us a
us
teaching of
teaching
truth,
of truth,
And
implanting
within
within
us
us
eternal life.
eternal life.
Blessed
Blessed
is
is
Adonai,
Adonai,
giver of the
giver of
Torah.
the Torah.
Amen. All right, everyone, have a good rest of the day and see you soon.
Right,
Okay.
Bye.
right.
Bye.
Bye.